In the beginning, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do with my final project. There was a lot of potential and options for me. I was considering exploring the possibilities of an animation. A few friends I know from Instagram who do mainly illustration make some really impressive animations. And I was sort of inspired by them, but mine weren't really that great. The other idea I had was to create a music video or some album art for a band. The only issue with that one is that I don't really have a band or a song to make a music video for, so I had to scrap that idea. Now I say I'd made all these considerations, but in reality I knew what I'd wanted to do, and that was to design and make some furniture to replace and update the furniture that we already have in the house. The biggest and most ambitious of these projects was going to be the TV stand for the main room. I wanted to make something that looked like what we already had, but was much more functional and elegant. The second piece I wanted to create was a stereo unit for my bedroom. I wanted to make it similar to the TV cabinet, but also much smaller because it has to fit in a smaller space, as my bedroom is the attic, so I don't have much room to work with. I'll try not to spend too long talking about the inspirations for these projects, because obviously I didn't follow through with them, but there's a few artists and designers I'd like to mention. The first big inspiration is Shea. She was part of the avant-garde cultural movement which for the first decades of the 20th century brought about profound change in aesthetic values and gave birth to a truly modern sensitivity towards everyday life. I was inspired by her work because of how simple and elegant it was. I wanted to create two pieces that mimicked that but in a style of my own that could also be looked at as individual pieces. My next big inspiration was Jean Prouvé. Jean Prouvé was a French designer like Charlotte Perriand, whose work echoed simplicity and elegance. He was a self-taught designer and architect with a background in metalwork, which in and of itself is inspirational enough. I found his work appealing, as he was able to seamlessly blend materials together to create beautiful pieces of furniture. The last artist I drew inspiration for these two pieces was Donald Judd. Judd was an American artist and designer who is mainly associated with minimalist work. He mainly focused on 3D works, making furniture and sculptures. His work is presented in such a way that enhances its simplicity and backs up his philosophies and views on furniture and art, which strengthens his presence as a designer. To complement the two cabinets, I also wanted to make a chair for the conservatory. To do this, I looked for inspiration from designers such as Charles and Ray Eames and Harry Bertoia. Charles and Ray Eames were a big influence for me, and have been for a few years. They were a pair of married industrial designers who had a significant influence on furniture and architecture in the mid-20th century. Their work can be seen everywhere and is very recognisable. If you know a specific piece of furniture was designed by the couple, you are able to associate that with their other works which follow similar principles. What I find most appealing about their work, and what I would have attempted to take away from them, is their use of plywood. They had advanced technology at their disposal at the time, which is how they were able to create such beautiful and timeless works. They were mainly known for their furniture, but also made significant advances in other fields, which I see as a very important goal and also very inspirational. All of these ideas were conceived to improve the spaces the products were intended for. Part of the art of making each of these pieces to me would have been to make them to function perfectly for the spaces they were made. Now I was really looking forward to finish each of these works, have them all displayed nicely, and maybe use pictures and comparisons to compare what we already had to show the improvement. I thought this would be a good idea for the final major presentation, as it was only around this time in the course, maybe a little earlier, that I had decided to apply for a place at university. With Cardiff Met, De Montfort Leicester and Bath Spa as options, I saw it fitting to make a bunch of furniture that could be used in my portfolio. Now after saying all this, you may have noticed that what I've got to show is not much like what I've been describing. That's because everything sort of changed after the group crit and discussion. Basically, after getting a second opinion from everyone, I realised that what I had made by this point was not only fairly mediocre but also not very unique or personal. It didn't reflect what I wanted to achieve and seemed barely inspired by my inspirations and designers. I know furniture isn't really a medium in which you can express your emotions, but the best designers all have unique philosophies and ideas that they transfer into their work, and they're almost always present and visible. I believe it was something along the lines of, what makes this work yours? Is this really something I'll be able to tell my friends and family this is Kai's work, or is it just some furniture? This is what changed my mind and began making me think in different ways, and I set myself a goal to create something that actually was unique and that I could proudly say is mine. After hearing the constructive criticism, I began making maquettes and models. They were very simple and had the same framework to my cabinets that I designed, but were somewhat more unique, using materials and shape to make them more interesting. I would have been fine committing to this idea, but I got sort of bored making the same models over and over, so I started making different types of furniture, namely tables. I used a variety of materials including tubes, plywood, paper and card to make my maquettes. One of the issues with using paper and card to make them, however, is that they are not very restrictive materials, meaning I could pretty much manipulate them to whatever state I wanted them to be in. I was able to bend and cut them with ease into shapes that would be much harder, if not impossible, to make with a more resilient material such as wood. Metal was a potential candidate, but it would end up being much more expensive. Anyway, making these models got me thinking of exploring more materials. Throughout the year I had consistently used string in my sketchbook and in some of my maquettes. This was also true about my A-level work, where I was inspired by artists such as Norm Garbo and Robbie Cuthbert. Norm Garbo is one of the most well-known artists to come out of the constructivist movement. He would often use string in his sculptures to create elegant forms. My favourite work of his is Head No. 2, which we saw in Liverpool on our trip to the galleries. His concept was to create a form that holds the same volume of an object, but with a fraction of the mass, and he succeeded doing so beautifully. Robbie Cuthbert, on the other hand, is an independent designer-maker from California who makes bespoke furniture using cables to hold them together. Some of his work is also inspired by the constructivist movement. I believe that it just goes to show that you can take something away from almost everything you see and apply it to your own work. After looking and reading about these artists and their work, I began using more string in my models, mainly as functional assets or to add an extra layer of diversity to the designs. It was around this time I had my second turning point of the final major project. The second turning point is basically what led me to where I am now. It came after I realised that I had not been considering how I would display my work at all. At the start I had considered using plinths for each of my pieces of furniture, or to even build a mock-up room with all of the pieces in use. I decided not to follow through with this idea because I saw it as a bit worn out, as it happens and has happened many times before. That and obviously the fact that I decided against making furniture in the first place. I went to the library for a day to try and get some inspiration because I was feeling pretty dry and worn out around this point. I was making model coffee tables that weren't especially interesting or unique, but I had made a cube of string that could have amounted to something. I had made this with the intention of making it into the base of a coffee table. Basically, make it to a larger scale and then put a glass top on it to show the sculpture. I think it could have worked, but I decided against this idea because I wasn't sure of how to display it. I didn't want to make just one because I saw it was too simple and boring, but if I were to make 3, there'd be no way I could display them well, or at least off the top of my head I couldn't think of a good idea of how to do that would be within my budget. Anyway, back to the point. I'd gone to the library to look for some inspiration and came across some really amazing works and artists that really fueled my flame and gave me some cracking ideas. These are the main artists that I drew inspiration from. I'm proud that they are not all in a single field and that many of them have very different things to like and learn from them. Now I know I haven't directly taken many things from these artists' works, but they did broaden my ideas of what was possible and most importantly made me think of how I could display my work. It was mainly the Japanese interior designers who got me to consider how my work should be displayed. Shigemasa Noi, Makatao Koizumi and Yasumichi Morita are all artists I'd like to mention, as their interiors gave me prime inspiration for how to display my work. Once this clicked for me, I began thinking of the two at once, considering what could be made to display and how the display could complement what was made. I began looking at work by artists such as Ruth Asawa, as well as returning to previous artists' works such as Robbie Cuthbert and Norm Garbo. Each of these artists use cable or a similar material in their works to create beautiful objects, and I knew that I would like to do the same, mainly following on from my previous maquettes and building on the development of these designs. But I'd also wanted to use cable in a project since finishing my A-level art, where I used string as a substitute. In conclusion, I used many different sources of inspiration to create my works. I'm hoping that it is clear that I've drawn from all of these artists and why they inspired me. I believe that I could have been more loose with what art I looked at, as it was mainly sculpture, architecture and furniture design, and that if I looked at artists who were in the field of illustration or fine art, I could have found other sources for ideas and plans. Some of the artists might have had nothing to show for themselves, and some of them I might have found really inspirational. Either way, I believe it's very important to look for as much inspiration as you can from as many different places as possible.